So, hello. So you can hear me? Fine. I'm here to share with you some of my QML and QtQuick best practices. But before that, just for the company, as you don't know, we have a rifle for this drone, which is nicely hackable with C++, which is our favorite language apart from QML. And this is your second last chance to take part. And there are 2 colleagues, and you can put your business cards there in the bin. And it will be then at 4 o'clock in C1 in the last talk of Viking software. Okay. So about me, I started with Qt in the last century, so that's quite a while back. And I'm hacking with QML since now 8 years or something like this. Pretty much all the time since then. All different kinds of QML applications, so mobile, desktop, embedded. And since almost 3 years, I'm now a consultant for Viking software. Before that, different companies, freelancing. Yeah, but let's get to the topic. Some general rules. QML. It's easy to get messy files with QML. So I personally try to keep them pretty small with 300 lines or less. If it's more, something like 500 lines, then I really try to split it up in different components. It's just you get overwhelmed with all those lines, missing structure in QML a bit. The second one is the ID that every object. You can set the ID. Usually you use it to reference it. I set it for every item. Simply for the reason it serves as a documentation. For example, you have a mouse area, and the purpose of the mouse area is to prevent all the clicks and touches to go through to other items. So you just set the ID to mouse grabber or whatever, some descriptive name that you know, oh, that's what it's used for, as this mouse area won't have anything that it does. So it's not obvious what it's for. So I just say as a rule, just set an ID for every item. And the root item I always call root. So if I want to reference to the root item, it's root. Another one is for the structure. I always have the same structuring in the QML files. So in the beginning, it's the interesting parts for the auto vault. So it's more like the interface, which is all the properties, signals, function that I can call. And then usually there are some sub-items, states, and stuff like this. One thing is that I hide the properties that are not used for outside, just internal ones. How to do this, I will show a little bit later, as it can be done within QML itself. And at the bottom there is something, it's quite easy to break bindings in QML. And not too many people know that you can create a binding again in the JavaScript part. So you can break the binding by just setting width to the number 10, and then you just lose the binding to the parent width, and you can recreate the binding quite easily with this line at the bottom. So what else? Dependencies. As usual in software development, try to keep the dependencies low, encapsulate your classes, and in this case, items, components. How to do? It's not that easy, but one thing is, for example, don't reference to other items that you don't know. It's quite often you reference to the parent of your root item. So you know who is using your item. And this is an assumption you shouldn't make. Just provide a property that's used from outside, as the one that's using your component knows more about it, what's going on. Another one is don't set the position of items in the item itself. Don't say this button is at position 10, 20. As said, the outer world knows a lot more about what it's used. And if you want to have it reusable, don't set the position there. And if you start going that route, that's going to be hell. I've been there and gone back. Yeah, and to make it more generic, expose internal properties as alias. It's the most efficient one to the outer world. Yeah, and what you can do if you need to get access to other items is set those as properties. For example, the delegates have the chance to access the list view, and you can do the same with your stuff. You just have a property, you call it whatever you use, list view, and then you just pass the list view to that property, and you can just use it instead of just assuming the parent will be a list view. I'm pretty sure, and next day you want to use it somewhere else and not in a list view. So I want to show you here some quick examples. The left one, obviously good. Right one, shorter, is bad. So you can see one of some of the hints that I gave you. For example, on the right, you can see you have the position fixed. On the bottom, yeah, you are referring to the root parent property. On the left, on the total bottom, that's maybe very interesting. That's the one that I said, hiding properties. So I have a Qt object item. I set ID into intern. And so this one is only accessible within this QML file. So it can be misused from outside. So this helps you with the encapsulation. Yeah, the implicit width and implicit height is quite nice if you want to use the layout. So going on. The next one that I really like using is a fast reload of the UI. So in QML, instead of compiling your application, starting your application especially, every time you change something in the code and you want to test it, you can do it a lot faster with this reload. You can use it, for example, using some shortcut, so Control R or F5 or whatever. Or you can write some more C++ code where you can have a file system watcher. So the file system watcher then detects if you changed or saved a file, a QML file, in your tree. In that case, it just calls this function to reload your whole QML, which in the end speeds you up in typing, testing. That's quite nice. But there's one thing you need to know. It doesn't work if your QML files are in your sources. So in that case, I split it up in loading from file disk during development in debug mode. And if I deploy it, then I do it in the resources. Debugging, the not so fun part in QML. I guess you've been there. What I do quite often is that I use printf debugging, more or less. Printf debugging in the form of on with changed, then console log, and then I'm printing the property. As I do this quite often, and I'm a lazy person, in Qt Creator, I use a snippet. I created a snippet myself. You can see it in the line with this dollar signs. So that's the snippet. And in case you don't know the snippets in Qt Creator, there's a link. You should use them. They're pretty handy, even creating your own. And you can see then at the bottom, I call my snippet then dump property. And in Qt Creator, all I need to do is write dump, and then it suggests me dump property. I hit enter, I write the name of the property, and it does all the rest. So simply writing dump, enter, with, enter, and I have this printf debugging. That's pretty handy, at least if you do a lot of printf debugging as I do. I'm old school, yeah. Another form of debugging. For some items, you don't know the exact position, the exact sizes. They might be not totally clear. Like here, bottom right here, you can see this is just the text. And you don't know the exact size of the text item, as the text could be beyond the item. And width in that case is higher, the height is higher. And to visualize this, I draw a box, simply. Again, this is used quite often. And in this case, I have two solutions to do this. The one on the total left is I create a new component, calling it sizebox, which means this component needs to be accessible. So it's in many of my projects, there's this size box, which is not really used for any production code, but only for this debugging purpose. But you need to duplicate in every project. Another way is that you can see in the middle, using snippets. And again, I just need to type size, and it suggests the size box, hitting enter, and then it just fills the whole stuff here. So on the right side, you can see the size box, which is using the component. If you do the snippet one, then it just inserts all the text there. A simple way to detect where your items really are, as it can be confusing, where is my stuff? Another way to do something similar is this environment variable. You might not know. Set this environment variable, and there are a bunch more. You can see there in the link. Setting this one, starting your application, and it's rendered in this slightly odd way with a box and coloring all your items. But it can be insightful and to see where your stuff is, the exact positions and sizes and all the stuff. So then integration with C++. It's supposed to be simple, and sometimes it is. Some hints here. The simplest rule is splitting up the business logic with the UI. Meaning all your business logic should be in C++ and all your UI code in QML. So you have this really hard split between, okay, am I doing any business logic, any model, core, whatever you call it, or do I do any fancy UI stuff? And then you need to decide which language am I using. So this is this hard break that you need to do. You're forced to think about, is this business logic or is it UI? It helps to improve your whole design of your application. Then interacting between C++ and QML. If you want to communicate from C++ to the UI, you do it by sending signals, or you do it by setting properties. And then the QML just listens to the signals, and you have these bindings in QML. And if you do it the other way around, if you want from QML communicate to C++, you just set properties, or you call slots or function which are marked as Q invocable in C++. And there's one way to do the communication from C++ to QML, which is this find children method, which then recursively goes to your tree of items to find the item that has the object name set to this name. Don't do it. Simple hint, don't do it. You just change the object name. You have the object name twice. It is slow. I hardly find any reason to use it in normal production code, let's say. And then there is this QObjectList model. There are different QObjectList models around on GitHub, GitLab, or wherever. This is the one that I use, improved a little bit. So using a QList object model is pretty simple. It's just this abstract item model or list model from QML. But it's a template class, and you can just pass any QObject derived class there. And you can then use any property of this object. And in QML, you just use it as a model in any list view, basically list views, yeah, or repeater, whatever. So it's handy to use it there. On the C++ side, on the other hand, it's quite easy to use as well. For example, you can just use iterators to go through the whole list. So you have the range for loop, for example, in C++ 11, and you go through the whole model. Whenever you change something, it's propagated to QML. QML uses the bindings, updates, done. Compared to creating models on your own, that's really, really simple and easy. That's what I preferred. And, ooh, I'm pretty fast. So I'm basically done, but I have a bonus slide for you. Performance. Yeah, this is, the first one is that you use for the properties list of QVariant, for example. If you use this, then when adding one item or removing an item, well, in this list, you change the whole list. So if you use it in a repeater or in the list view, it needs to recreate all the delegates. So this is obviously very slow. Use the QObjectList model, for example, that I showed you before. Then loaders. I use loaders a lot. They help you in startup performance, then in scrolling performance, keeping your memory low. They are awesome. I use them a lot. Successful. What else do I have? Yeah, QImage has this neat source size property. Quite often you have a quite big image, and you're only supposed to show a small thumbnail of it. And you can set the source size. Source size is set when you are reading the image and setting the original size, or if you set it yourself, then it already loads a smaller version of this one. For example, it can, in JPEG and in PNG, it's a lot faster in loading this. So if you have, for example, some thumbnails showing in a list view and you're loading 100 thumbnails, you save a lot of time, like a few milliseconds per item, which easily sums up to a second or even more. And then even if you set the asynchronous flag in the loading, you see it immediately. So that's pretty neat. Then one thing in the whole QML is if you set a property, it emits a signal, it changed, and this might trigger another binding, and this one then again sends, oh, I changed, and this can easily flood a lot of events, and this slows down a lot. So if you do properties in C++, make sure that it really changed. Do not set the same value. If, for example, you have a property name and your name is already Schwann, and you set it to Schwann again, don't set the signal that it changed. Yeah, that's a little bit tricky. It can easily be that properties toggle. So something is hidden, shown again, hidden, shown again, hidden, and shown. And this in the process of show it the first time. And there you need to know, okay, who called the hiding and the show, and you need to avoid this one. That's pretty tricky, but at least you should know this as a source of slowness. And the last one is pretty simple. If you have a large data set and you're loading it, load the whole data set in one queue list and then apply it to the model at once. Don't add one item after another, as this would trigger an update, an update, an update, an update, and redraw and so on. Just everything at once initially will speed up again. And yeah, with this, I'm done. Open for questions and answers.
Many thanks, Günter. And are there any questions to this presentation? Okay.
Thank you for the great presentation. I have a question regarding the deployment code. So let's say release code and the debug code. You have a lot of components that you only use in debug mode, if I understand correctly, in QML. So in C++, it's no problem. You can use compile time defines, and it doesn't get compiled, the debug and the release. They're clearly separated. How can you do this in QML? What's the best option to do this?
Usually I don't have too many of these, and so I just ship them as part of the release. One part would, or one possibility would be, well, if you ship them as files, then it's part of the installer to skip those. If it's if you have them as a resource, you could have two different resource files, one only for the release stuff and only for the release and the debug, or you have one on for the whole release and one additional only for the debug ones.
Currently, just a solution I'm using, just a suggestion. I wanted to ask if there is something better. It's just like setting a context property in the main CPP file, right? So setting it based on the define, if it's debug mode, you set some property to true or to false, and then in QML you can just decide at runtime. It's an overhead, of course, because you always check if debug mode is on. So if this property is set to true, for example, it's a bool property. You just
yes, that's definitely would be a possibility to have a global property, read-only property that you can just reach out, and that should be fairly fast. But yeah, depending on which platform and how critical the performance is, it's a good idea. But if it's really performance critical, I wouldn't do it. Yeah.